I am back with the Hardy Boys. We are on The Great Airport Mystery, Chapter 2 Factory Detectives. Who are you? Frank demanded. He snapped on his flashlight and directed the beam towards the mysterious figure. He was not the man who set the flare. Drop that light, the stranger ordered gruffly. Frank tossed the flashlight to the ground. The man then played a bright light of his own on the Hardys' faces and slowly stepped towards them. As he approached, the boys could see that he was armed with a double-barreled shotgun. "What are you doing here?" he growled. "Our car turned over," Frank began, "and we're looking for—" "What's that you say?" the man shouted, cocking an ear towards Frank. "Speak louder." "I said our car turned over," Frank shouted, "and we are—" "Your car turned over," the stranger interrupted. "How did that happen?" "The wheel of an airplane struck the roof." "Airplane? What airplane? Speak louder." The stranger was apparently hard of hearing. He had not heard the noise. On the other hand, the boys wondered if he could be connected with the mysterious events that had occurred earlier, and was bluffing. They decided to force the issue. Frank told him briefly about the roadblock, the red flare, and the low-flying plane. He also mentioned seeing a man run off the road into the woods and said that later they had thought they were being shot at. "You're both crazy," the stranger sneered. "I didn't see any airplane or red flare." He then motioned with his flashlight for the boys to walk on past him. "You better get out of here right now if you know what's good for you. You're on private property." "We didn't notice any fences or signs around," Joe retorted. "I don't care what you didn't notice," the man shouted. "Get going." As the boys walked past him, they managed to catch a closer glimpse of his face. They saw that he was middle-aged and pale and haggard. Frank asked that he and Joe be allowed to find a couple of poles. The stranger hesitated, then gave permission. Frank and Joe soon located several fallen saplings. They picked up two of the strongest and dragged them to the car. Then they positioned the saplings under the convertible and pushed against them with all of their strength. At first it seemed hopeless, but after another powerful lunge the car began to move, then shivered to an upright position. The boys stopped for a moment to catch their breaths. They noticed that the stranger was watching them from the edge of the woods. "Get going!" he yelled angrily. Frank tugged at the jammed door on the driver's side. Finally it opened. The boys got in and Frank turned the ignition key. After a few seconds the ignition came to life. Except for the draining off of some fuel and oil, the car seemed to be in safe driving condition. Frank maneuvered it carefully for a few moments, then gathered speed and set off for home. "Wow," Joe sighed. "I like excitement, but tonight was enough to last for a month." Trying to find some answers to all that had happened, the brothers discussed the mystery, but were unable to arrive at any conclusions. As they got closer to home, their thoughts shifted to the telephone call from their father. What could the case be? Their faces lit up in anticipation. Nearly 3 hours later, the boys reached Bayport, where they lived. As they entered the living room of the Hardys' house, their mother greeted them. She was an attractive, slender woman who tried to take the adventurous life of her family philosophically. Mrs. Hardy could not help worrying, however, over the dangers she knew they must encounter. "Hello, sons," she said in a relieved voice. "Hello, Mother," the boys answered, and Frank added, "Sorry to be so long driving back, but we took a shortcut that turned out to be time-consuming." "My goodness, what happened to the two of you?" she asked in alarm as they bent down to kiss her. She pulled them closer to the lamp. Joe had a large swelling near his temple, Frank an ugly bruise under his left eye. Mrs. Hardy wanted to call the doctor, but the boys assured her that their injuries were not serious. In order not to upset her further, Frank said they had been bruised when he stopped the car short. Miss Gertrude Hardy, sister of the boy's father, entered the room. She was a tall woman who secretly adored her nephews, but constantly scolded them for not being cautious enough in their sleuthing. Occasionally, her dire predictions of danger came true. At seeing their injury, she immediately said, "Ice packs for both of you." "Please, Auntie, not until we talk to Dad," Frank pleaded. The brothers hurried to their father's study. Mr. Hardy looked up as they entered. "Hello, boys," he said. "Glad to see you back. Sorry I had to break up your visit." Noticing their injuries, he asked what happened. Joe told Mr. Hardy about their adventure while Frank began to hunt through the identification files. Several minutes later, he held up a card. "I found it," he exclaimed. "Joe, I'm sure this is the man with the flare who ran into the woods." Joe looked at the photograph mounted on the card. "You're right." Frank had handed the card to his father. Mr. Hardy took it and leaned back in his chair. He was a handsome, athletic-looking man. "Ah, yes," he said. "I seem to remember this man. He's an ex-convict known only by the name of Bush Barney. No aliases. He served a 3-year term for robbery." "I wonder," said Joe, "if there's some connection between Bush Barney and that airplane we saw. Could the pilot have been dropping stolen merchandise to him?" "It's a possibility," Frank replied. He reached for the telephone and began dialing a number. "I'm going to check with the control tower at Bayport Airport to see if they know of any aircraft that is overdue." Frank identified himself to the tower operator on duty and then questioned him. He was told that all flight plans to and from Bayport had been properly closed. The tower operator also said that the transient aircraft, as well as those permanently based on the field, had been accounted for. Frank hung up, disappointed that he had not uncovered a lead. Meanwhile, Mr. Hardy had been jotting down a few notes on Bush Barney. "Perhaps," he said, "the incidents you have told me about may be linked to a new case I have coming up. That's why I asked you boys to come back." Mr. Hardy stated that earlier in the day he had received a visit from a Mr. Albert Allen, president of the Stanwide Mining Equipment Company. The plant was located on the north edge of Bayport Airport and manufactured mechanical and electronic tools and other equipment for the mining industry. Mr. Allen told the detective he was certain he had unearthed a racket within his company. He had been getting complaints from customers about shortages in orders. In each instance, a typed note had been enclosed in the shipment promising that the shortage would be made up at a later date. But the promise never been kept, the customer said, and they needed the material. "What sort of material have the shortages involved?" Frank asked. "Mostly small but expensive components," his father answered, "especially electronic parts with a high platinum content." Mr. Allen, the detective continued, had ordered an examination of his company's books. Everything had tallied. Recently, he had had a meeting with Mr. Cosgrove, whose firm was one of Stanwide's largest customers. Mr. Cosgrove had threatened to sever business relations with Stanwide because of shortages. The publicity resulting from such a move could be extremely damaging to Stanwide. Lucy. Mr. Hardy said, "Even more damaging than the lost orders." "It sounded like an interesting case," said Joe. "When do we begin?" "Tomorrow," Mr. Hardy said. "First, we're going to stop at the doctor's office and have him check out those bruises of yours. Then we'll drive out to Stanwide to meet Mr. Allen. I'm arranging to have you boys pose as company employees." "Employees?" queried Frank. "Yes," his father answered. "Actually, you are going to be doing a factory investigation job." That's the end of chapter 2.